Locked on Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked on Longhorns is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/locked on college. Use code locked on college for a first deposit match of up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. And on today's episode of Locked on Longhorns, Texas squeaks by Houston 31-24, survive and advance, all that matters at this point. We discussed the game from all angles. And then in the last segment, the Big 12 roundup, everything you need to know about your least favorite conference that happened this weekend outside of the University of Texas. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So normally, if I'm watching a game like this where Texas is tied 24-24 in the fourth quarter against Houston, Quinn Ewers is out of the game, Donovan Smith is dealing, and it looks like the defense can't defend a crossing route, I normally would be jumping on my couch, screaming at the wall, running around my house, probably yelling to fire Steve Sarkisian, bench Quinn Ewers, and fire Pete Kukowski, and just all of the hilarious overreactions we have as fans when things aren't going our way, right? And I know watching that game as a fan, there was a ton of anxiety and feeling like, oh, here we go. Right, here we go again. Is this the game where Texas plays down to their competition and loses to a team they have no business losing, right? That normally would have been my feelings watching that game. But I live in Houston. Texas was in Houston. So, I made the decision to go watch the Horns play in person. And I have to say that even though I had some of those feelings in person and was wondering why it was such a close game, because when I got there, it was 21-0 or 14-0, and then they scored the 21 pretty much immediately after that. It was fun because I thought that there was a ton of energy in the building in person, right? And that's going to happen when you have a 31-24 football game with so many emotions on both sidelines, right? And it was a great environment. I think there were 42,000 people there. It was the second largest crowd in TDECU history, I believe. Houston fans certainly showed up and showed out. Texas fans certainly showed up and showed out. It looked like a version of the Cotton Bowl with all that orange and red, except it wasn't split at the 50. It was just all merged in together, right? But like I said, I thought that Houston fans brought great energy. The band brought great energy. And Texas fans and Houston fans were both really loud and both tried to will their teams to win. And 31-24, it was certainly a nail biter. It felt that way in person. And it was a little bit more fun because Texas won at the end, right? And then right after they did get that 4th and 1, I got up and left, right? So it was a really fun game in person. And, you could ask the question, should Texas have won more impressively? Should they have won by more than 7 points? I know there's a lot of people that lost money this weekend because Texas did not cover the spread. You certainly can make the case that Texas, if they are legitimately a Big 12 championship contender and a college football playoff contender, that they should look a little bit more impressive coming off a bye against a team like Houston. But Houston came into that game with a lot of confidence. Dana Holgorsen has a winning record against Texas. This is a Houston team that had just won their last game at home, on a Hail Mary against West Virginia. They put their jersey, their pants, and their shoes on just like the Texas football team does. And, every team wants to be the team, especially at home, to knock off a team like Texas. It's Texas. So every year the teams in Texas are going to play their hardest to beat us. But when you have a team coming in that's one of the best in the country and a legitimate college football playoff contender, then it makes it that much more special to try to knock them off. And certainly they came very close to doing that, right? A lot of people and a lot of the conversation around this game has been focused on one particular play or decision by the referees, right? Where there was a controversial spot on Houston's last drive in the fourth quarter where it seemed as though Houston got a first down and they were given a 4th and 1, a bad spot by the referees. And normally, I come on here and I think I do a pretty good job of telling it like I see it and not being biased and telling the truth for the most part, with no agenda, right? But I don't even think I have to do that in this case. I think it was pretty obvious that it was likely a bad spot and Houston probably should have had a first down there. But, right, this is a big but. I think where the conversation has gotten a little crazy is when we start to say Houston got robbed, Houston lost because of that call, or Texas won because of that call. Because to say that, you have to then assume that Houston, not only because of that first down, was going to score a touchdown right there to tie the game at 31, but then they were going to outplay Texas offensively and defensively after that to win the game. And based on what I had seen throughout the entirety of that game, Texas was not playing their best game. Houston was playing really well on offense and sometimes on defense. But I did not get the feeling that Houston had the capability to outplay Texas on both sides of the ball for an extended period of time, especially with even with Malik Murphy in the game. Right before that, Texas had just came down and scored the go-ahead touchdown with relative ease, right? They had ran the ball on pretty much every play. I think the only throw or only completion, I should say, was to Jordan Whittington behind the line of scrimmage. So essentially, they just handed the ball to Jonathan Brooks, handed the ball to Cedric Baxter, and drove down the field and ran the ball to win the game, right? So to say that Houston lost because of that spot or Texas won because of that spot is pretty egregious, right? Because it takes a lot of mental gymnastics to then assume that after that, Houston was going to do everything it took to win that game when they were still down 7 points when that decision was made. Also, what we're forgetting is that they had a chance to be resilient, right? They had a chance to make that call null and void, and they didn't. If that team was good enough to beat Texas, then they were certainly good enough to get 1 yard on the biggest play of the game, right? And they could not do that on 4th and 1 to make that call by the referees null and void. And bad spots and bad calls by the refs happen in every game. So it certainly was a bad spot. They should have gotten a first down. They should have had the opportunity to have 4 tries to get in the end zone, but they had a 4th and 1, their biggest play of the season up until that point, and they couldn't get 1 yard. So getting online to say that Texas lost that game because of the refs or Houston was going to win that game if you gave them a first down, it takes a lot of mental gymnastics to get there. But then again, it's Twitter, it's online. It takes a lot of mental gymnastics to put half the stuff I see on there anyway. So there we go. Now talking about Texas specifically and what I saw in the game, I thought our passing game was really unimaginative, right? And it feels like that's something I've been saying, coming into this game. 27% of either Quinn Ewers completions or attempts were behind the line of scrimmage. And I just felt like we had way too much talent on our side of the ball on offense to be throwing glorified screen passes every other play, right? That's kind of what it felt like. And then handing the ball to Jonathan Brooks and Cedric Baxter. And then in this game, it just really jumped off the screen, right? I was sitting there in person at the game, and I was like, why are we throwing the ball to Jonathan Brooks so much? Like, it was just like a screen, check down, screen, check down, screen, check down. And then I watched it again on Nash's channel on Texas Clips, the every play. And it was just even more apparent that all we were doing were throwing check downs, dump offs, and screen passes. And I just feel like when we look at our pass catchers, right, we talk about our offensive line being one of the most talented in the country. They have a lot of experience and depth in that unit. Our pass catchers, at worst, if you're talking about the wide receivers, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, and Xavier Worthy all would have to be top 35, top 40 receivers in the country at worst, right? And then you're talking about JT Sanders, who was top 3 at his position, and it just does not feel like we can push the ball down the field. Now, Quinn Ewers made an excellent throw to Xavier Worthy, dropped it right in the bucket, right? I know it looked like there was double coverage. It was somewhat double coverage, but the way that he threw it, he eliminated the safety from even being a factor in that play. But I ask, if we have a quarterback like Quinn Ewers and talented players like Xavier Worthy who can take the top off at the defense at any time, then why is our passing game, does it seem like all happen within 5 to 10 yards or behind the line of scrimmage? When you look at Quinn Ewers' game, he had 23 completions in this game, right? 11 of Quinn's completions were checkdowns to Jonathan Brooks or Cedric Baxter in less than 4 quarters, right? Really less than 3 quarters. That's not great, right? Gunnar Helm had 2 catches for 6 and 7 yards. Those are extensions of the run game, right? Glorified checkoffs, right? Checkdowns. He threw multiple screen passes to Xavier Worthy. I know that Steve Sarkisian is calling that. I'll get to him in a second, right? But it's like all just simple, right? Dump off screens and simple passes. We are not threatening the defense down the field at all. And then Jordan Whittington had a 3-yard catch while Quinn Ewers was in the game. So you start to look at Quinn Ewers' completion percentage and you're saying, oh, wow. Or you look at the box score and you take, oh, wow. He completed 70+% of his passes, this, and that. And then you look at the passes he's throwing and they're all check down screens and dump offs, right? He had the one play to Adonai Mitchell where Adonai ran a really good route. It was 14 yards. He scored the touchdown on that. After that, he did not connect with Adonai Mitchell again, right? Like I said, he had the one deep play to Xavier Worthy, which was one of Quinn Ewers' best throws since he's been here. But everything else was either a dump off to Xavier Worthy or a screen pass to Xavier Worthy, a dump off to Gunnar Helm or a dump off to Jordan Whittington, or the 11 checkdowns to Cedric Baxter and Jonathan Brooks. I just thought that was egregious. Maybe, Quinn Ewers felt that he could not read this defense and just wanted to take, the simple plays and what was there. The play that he got hit on, they did not the play that he got hurt on. They said it was a sack, but the play he got hit on where he scrambled, you can literally see him look to Jaden Blue as his first read, as the check down. So part of it maybe was the defense that they were playing and limiting him, making him take some underneath stuff. But I think there was also part of it where Quinn Ewers just couldn't, or decided that he was not going to read the defense. And his initial thought was to throw the ball to the running backs. And we have way too much talent to not be able to threaten defenses down the field or even in the intermediate part of the field with our passing game unless it's schemed wide open, right? Like that JT Sanders play that went for 23 yards, he was wide open on that. AD Mitchell was wide open on that, right? The one play that he made into any type of coverage was the deep throw to Xavier Worthy. He completed it for a touchdown. We have way too much talent on our offense to not think that we can repeat that multiple times throughout the game. And now I want to talk about Steve Sarkisian, because Quinn Ewers can only do what Steve Sarkisian is asking of him, right? Adonai Mitchell is one of the best receivers in the country, and he did not come over here to get one catch for 14 yards and only 3 targets against one of the worst defenses in the country, right? His second target was a panic target by Quinn Ewers because the pressure was in his face, so he just threw it up. Adonai Mitchell had no chance to get it, and then he ran a nice route at the end of the game, and Malik Murphy, who was coming in rusty, not even expecting to play in the game probably, missed him on a throw, right? Like I said, Adonai Mitchell was way too talented to have one catch for 14 yards against one of the worst defenses in the country. Xavier Worthy, he had the deep pass, right? But my thing is, if he's getting deep like that once in the game, why are we not going back to that other points in the game? Is it because Quinn Ewers is not completing those passes, or Steve Sarkisian is not calling those shots down the field and he's getting too conservative, right? Why are we throwing screen passes on back-to-back plays to Xavier Worthy? Little dump offs 5 yards in, against zone coverage, things like that, when I know that Xavier Worthy can get open in any area on the field. Part of that is on Quinn Ewers to recognize it, but part of that is on Steve Sarkisian to make sure that Quinn Ewers recognizes it and calls it. And then when we talk about Jordan Whittington, right, just being a leader on this football team, being somebody who can definitely make plays in the slot, but also on the outside, somebody being a bulldog with, the ball in his hands and making plays after the catch. 2 targets, both within 5 yards, one behind the line of scrimmage. JT Sanders, one of the best tight ends in the country, one of the best tight ends the 40 has ever seen, only 2 catches for 29 yards. So a lot of that is on Quinn Ewers not making the reads down the field, not trusting what he's seeing and not trusting his receivers down the field and going to the check down and a lot of those short passes. But a lot of that is Steve Sarkisian and the mentality of this football team and this offense right now as well, because we have spammed those screen passes, those check downs, and all of those short opportunities so much that now it feels like if a defense gives us any type of look, we just wave the white flag and say, oh, okay, well, we're just going to take what they give us all the way down the field. And hopefully we're just talented enough to, out-talent them and beat them for 60 minutes, which is cool, right? The main objective of a football team is to win games. But like I said, this passing game is just really unimaginative right now. It doesn't feel like we can consistently threaten defenses 20 plus yards down the field outside of that one throw to Xavier Worthy. We are playing right into defense's hands, just throwing short passes to all of our playmakers and hoping that they can break tackles and move us all the way down the field. That has been the case thus far because we are 6-1. But as we've seen the last 2 weeks, Oklahoma did a really good job of stopping that, and U of H, for the most part, did a really good job of stopping that. But Texas just had too much talent in the end, and U of H had some turnovers, which led Texas to winning that game. If you play against some more talented teams and try to just screen past them or check down them to death all the way down the field, Texas may end up losing another game if Steve Sarkisian doesn't bring some more juice to this offense. Now, you talk about the juice in the passing game. The running back certainly had it in the running game. Jonathan Brooks and Cedric Baxter did a great job of wearing down that defense. 26 carries for 141 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Brooks averaged 5 yards a carry. Cedric Baxter averaged 7 yards a carry. And then 201 total yards when you include all the checkdowns on 37 touches. So it's hard as hell to go into a game and have to tackle Jonathan Brooks and Cedric Baxter 36, 37 times. And they certainly wore them out. And we saw that on the last drive where Jonathan Brooks and Cedric Baxter literally carried Texas to a 31-24 lead and the victory in the end. A quick word from our sponsors, and then I give more of my thoughts on what I saw between Texas and Houston on Saturday. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Athletic Brewing. Once again, a quick thank you to Athletic Brewing and Kristen Jones for coming on Locked On Longhorns on Friday's show. And Kristen Jones, because he came on the show, I'm going to make him my game changer of the week. over there at right tackle, once again leading this Texas offense or being part of a unit that makes sure everything works on this offense. And they scored 31 points. And like I said, our running backs, 201 total yards on 37 touches. None of that happens without the offensive line, and none of that happens without Athletic Brewing's own NIL athlete, Kristen Jones. Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good with full flavor and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. Their brews are great tasting and award-winning and beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. They taste amazing, and my favorite part, no hangovers ever. They are truly fit for all times. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions, and conditions do apply. Athletic Brewing Company is fit for all times. If you're watching on YouTube, I don't know why they just did that. Like, I don't know, but hey, we're here. It started glitching on me, technical difficulties. All right, so continuing the conversation about what I saw on Saturday between Texas and Houston. My first thought is our defense is going to go as our defensive line goes. And I thought that our defensive line played a really good game against a tough quarterback that's hard to defend, right? We saw that last year when he played with Texas Tech, and I said that on my crossover with Locked On Cougs host Parker Hainsworth, is that Donovan Smith is not one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but he is a dual threat quarterback that is really dynamic. And when he's on and when he's making the right decisions with his arm and his legs, he's tough to stop, right? Especially if you cannot get him on the ground. And I think what we've seen for the better part of the last 2 years, and I'm not sure if this is just we do not have the athletes at this position to be one of the best teams in the country in terms of sacks, or this is something that Pete Kwiatkowski is doing schematically. I'm also not going to come on here and act like I'm a X and O or schematic genius, right? So I really don't know, right? If somebody in the comments could tell me, that would be great. But this defensive line, like I said, this defense is going to go as this defensive line goes, our front seven goes. And we have to do a better job of actually getting to the quarterback. The last 2 years, Texas has been one of the best teams in the country in terms of generating pressure. You saw it in this game. We've seen it all year. This team can do a really good job of generating pressure. The problem is quarterbacks can evade pressure. The problem is quarterbacks can make throws under pressure. And we watched Donovan Smith do that all game, right? So this team that gets a ton of pressure on the quarterback only got 3 sacks on 46 passes. Now, that's better than you've done for the majority of the season because you only have 17 sacks in 7 games. So you're averaging less than 3 sacks a game. So you did really well in this game, but Donovan Smith also threw 46 passes. So did you get 3 sacks because he gave you more opportunities throwing 46 passes? Is that the case there? Or did the defensive line really get active and get to Donovan Smith? Because Quinn Ewers was sacked 3 times and didn't even play the full game and only had 29 passing attempts. So I think that this defensive line, the front seven, Pete Kwiatkowski, whoever, needs to do a better job of finding a way to get these players home, right? Because him being upright for 43 of his passes, right? Or 43 of his dropbacks, however you want to, look at it, was almost the reason that Texas lost, right? He was pretty much able to do whatever he wanted to do for the most part. And now we're seeing when this Texas team can't get pressure or can't get to the quarterback, we have some deficiencies on the back end. So, like I said, our defense is a really talented unit, and for the most part, they've been great this year. But our defense is really, at this point, solely dependent on our defensive line not only getting pressure, not only getting a pass rush, but actually getting to the quarterback. And if they cannot get to quarterbacks and get sacks at a high level in the back half of the season, I think we're going to see more of what we saw on Saturday, which is opposing offenses and opposing quarterbacks at some point having their way with this defense in this secondary at certain points in the game. I think at this point, Pete Kwiatkowski needs to adjust, right? We have seen teams a couple of times this year do a really good job of putting our safeties in conflict against Oklahoma or beating them in man, right? And that game on Saturday was just a clinic in terms of running crossing routes across the field until they find a way to stop it, right? Remember, I know some people watching this or listening to this were watching that game. Remember when you were watching Colorado versus Colorado State at midnight or 1 a.m. and it felt like Colorado just could simply not stop a crossing route, and Colorado State just kept running them across the field. That was literally reincarnated against Texas and Houston on Saturday. And our safeties just did not play a great game at all. I know that Michael Taft had a huge interception, which was one of the biggest reasons they won. But outside of that, like I said, Pete Kwiatkowski needs to make an adjustment because he is putting his safeties in a position that they are not great in, right? He is not putting his safeties in a position where they can generate much success because none of them, and it's a tough job against wide receivers and tight ends, let me say that, right? But none of them have shown an ability to be great in one-on-one coverage thus far. Every time I looked up, Keaton Crawford on Saturday was getting burnt across the field or for that deep touchdown. Every time I looked up on a crossing route, Michael Taft was out of position or getting burnt across the field on a crossing route. Jaron Thompson, I don't know what's happened to him. It's looked like his speed decreased to -2, -3 over the offseason. Every time I looked up, he's getting burnt across the field or late to make a tackle or somebody's running by him, right? That's been a theme throughout the season. And then Derek Williams shows flashes in his play, but he's a true freshman, right? At some point, you have to, expect those true freshman growing pains and true freshman mistakes. So part of this is because we've lost Ryan Watts and we had some other injuries at the corner position. Jade Barron didn't play the first half. And so, maybe we're putting too much pressure on our safeties, but without a pass rush, without us actually getting to the quarterback and sacking the quarterback and making him uncomfortable, it looks like in Pete Kwiatkowski's defense, that's going to lead to some opportunities with our safeties in one-on-one coverage or our safeties in conflict, trying to decide who to cover on the back end. And based on what we've seen throughout this season, that is not ideal, right? Because like I said, Keaton Crawford, Michael Taft, and Jaron Thompson all had plays on Saturday they would like to have back against that U of H offense. But, thankfully, you get to learn those lessons in a win instead of a loss. Now, we talked about on offense how the great equalizer is always quarterback play, right? How Donovan Smith, even though Texas is more talented, I'll just say Texas is more talented and should have won that game. It was only a 7-point game, largely because Donovan Smith was one of the best players on the field, right? He turned the ball over 2 times, and that's why they couldn't tie the game or win it. But he was certainly one of the best players on the field outside of those 2 plays. That was the great equalizer that made a game between Texas and Houston way closer than it should have been. On defense or just period with a football team, it's turnovers and penalties. And I thought that 3 huge plays went against Houston in a 7-point game that in most scenarios, if the talent was equal, could have went either way, right? Donovan Smith had 2 bad turnovers, right? I've never been hit by Jalen Ford, so I can't just sit here and say, well, he should have held on to the ball. But that turnover came when they had momentum. If he holds on to that ball and they have another chance to get a first down or, maybe even get into field goal range, whatever, we could be looking at potentially a different game. So, obviously Jalen Ford hits hard and it's tough to hold on to the ball when you get hit, but you can't afford to turn the ball over against a team like Texas who already has leaps and bounds more talent than you on the football field, right? If you give them extra opportunities, you're making it that much tougher for you to win the game. Same with the interception of Michael Taft. That's just a bad play, right? If you're going to make that throw into double coverage like Quinn Ewers did, it has to be perfect. Otherwise, you're giving Michael Taft an opportunity for an easy, uncontested interception, and he made that catch. That's a bad play by Donovan Smith. And then, believe it or not, U of H only had 1 penalty in the entire game. But it was huge, right? It was a play where they had gotten into the red zone for Texas and then immediately get a 15-yard unsportsmanlike penalty because one of their receivers is muffing Terrence Brooks in the face mask, and Terrence Brooks didn't respond. So they had 2 turnovers and 1 penalty, all came at crucial points when U of H had momentum on offense. And in a game, you lost by 7 points to a team that was much more talented than you, and a team in a game where you had to play perfect. That was probably the reason you lost. So, the defensive line certainly has to do a better job of getting sacks on the quarterback. The safeties in the back end have to do a better of covering. Pete Kwiatkowski has to do a better job of putting his defensive players in a position to succeed. But this game came down to likely 3 plays, 2 turnovers by Donovan Smith, and a boneheaded penalty by one of their wide receivers. A good win for Texas, survive and advance. Hopefully you can do the same against BYU next week. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the Big 12 roundup to end the show. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks is the most fun I've had, winning up to 25 times my money this football season, betting on player props, overs, unders, all of that jazz. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the number one daily fantasy sports app. And now you can download money on Prize Picks or deposit money on Prize Picks even using Apple Pay. Right. So they are making it easy for you to deposit and play on Prize Picks and easy to win money with all kind of promotions and free squares. Once again, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. The NBA season starts tomorrow night. That's Tuesday night. And they currently have a free square for Steph Curry on there. He only has to get 1 point, and you know Steph Curry is going to get 1 point on opening night for you to cover that bet. So if you're thinking about betting, thinking about going to Prize Picks, make that one of your first, bets. You only got to put 2 in to make a parlay. If one of them is a free square for Steph Curry, then that means you only got to get one pick right. So take advantage of that. Go to prizepicks.com right now /lockedoncollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. All right, the Big 12 roundup, everything you need to know outside of your favorite Texas football team. All right, so we're starting with UCF and Oklahoma. Oklahoma came out a little flat, just like Texas did. Oklahoma was coming off of a really big win and a bye week against Texas and then a bye week. So naturally, you felt like maybe they would have some emotional letdown, and they certainly did. Texas did too, but they didn't have the excuse of beating Oklahoma the week before the bye, right? So Oklahoma only beat UCF 31-29. Of course, this was an emotional game of some sorts for Dylan Gabriel because he played at UCF for the first 4 to 5 years of his career. But, it's the same thing with Oklahoma, right? With less pressure or maybe more pressure, right? Because they have 0 losses at this point. Right now, they are in the driver's seat to get to the Big 12 championship game. And based on what happens in some other marquee games this year in the country, they could be in the driver's seat if they win out to get to the college football playoff as well. So, like I said, for Texas survive and advance, it's the same for Oklahoma. And even though it didn't look pretty, they survived and advanced. They're still undefeated on the season. Baylor 32 over Cincinnati 29. It just has not been smooth sailing for the new Big 12 teams, especially going against the old Big 12 teams. Blake Shapen is back. He had a nice performance in this game. I think he was 25 or 42, so he could have been more accurate, but over 300 yards and a touchdown. And Cincinnati, after starting 2-0, has really free fallen, especially playing some tougher teams in conference. Oklahoma State kept their Big 12 championship hopes alive, still only have 1 loss in conference, even though their other loss was a horrible loss to South Alabama by 26 points at home. They had a nice win against Kansas State. I can't remember who they beat last week. Oh, yeah, they beat Kansas State and then beat Kansas. And then now they beat West Virginia on the road, right? And West Virginia had played good football this year. Oklahoma State beat them 48-34. So I still think Oklahoma State probably loses a couple more games on their schedule. They have to play Oklahoma, but that could be a tough game for Oklahoma at this point in Stillwater, likely at night. But Oklahoma State is playing some good football, and I don't think they can make the Big 12 championship game. But 7 games in, they're still somewhat controlling their own destiny. So we'll see what happens with them. Texas Tech, they're just a mess at this point. I still think that's a team that will play really hard, in the last game of the regular season, and certainly will give Texas a run for their money. But Texas Tech has nowhere near achieved expectations that they had for this season coming in. When they started to talk amongst themselves like they were one of the best teams in the Big 12 and one of the best teams in the country, now they are under 500, right? And lost to a BYU team who had gotten embarrassed by TCU the week before and bounced back, right? So they're 5-2. They look like one of the better teams in the Big 12 conference as a whole. It's a down year, but especially the best team that was added, in preparation for Texas and Oklahoma to leave, the SEC, leave the Big 12 and head to the SEC, Lord. And now you have a BYU team that's 5-2 coming into Austin this weekend, likely without Quinn Ewers. And it's going to be a tough battle for the Texas Longhorns and Malik Murphy in his first start. And then TCU has been one of the weirdest teams to read in the country throughout this season. They lost to Colorado, but I didn't think that was a bad loss. Even though TCU did a lot of things to lose that game, I thought that, maybe Colorado was just better than we thought. Then they lost to West Virginia and Iowa State, and we're like, okay, this is a bad TCU team. Like, they can't recover from all of the talent they lost. They're not great at quarterback. Like, there's just a lot going on, right? But then they beat BYU by almost 40. And I was like, okay, well, maybe they're back on track, right? This isn't a season where, they'll make the college football playoff, obviously, or, make the Big 12 championship, but they can beat anybody on their schedule. And then they come back and lose by 38 points to Kansas State. So TCU is one of the hardest teams to read in the country. But certainly, if Texas shows up and takes care of business, this doesn't look like a TCU team that can beat them even on the road. Now, Kansas State does get a little bit interesting, right? Because this week they play Houston. You would expect Kansas State to win that game. They did lose 2 bad games, I feel like. They lost to Missouri and well, Missouri on the road isn't a bad game, but they should have beat Missouri. And then they lost to Oklahoma State on the road, another game that they should have won. I'll consider that a bad loss. But now, when you look at it, they still only have one Big 12 loss, so they somewhat control their own destiny to get to the Big 12 championship. They play Houston this week. They should win that game. They likely play Texas next week without Quinn Ewers. Anything could happen in that game if you're playing against a backup quarterback, even though Texas has had Kansas State's number since 2017. And then after that, they play, I think, Kansas, Iowa State, and 2 other teams they should beat. So Kansas State certainly at this point, especially now playing Texas without their starting quarterback, has a really good chance if they can take care of business in Austin to get to the Big 12 championship game for the second year in a row. So Kansas State is looking really nice right now, coming off of a 41-3 win over TCU. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We will get into more of the injury conversation. A lot of things happened in that game on Saturday against Houston, especially the big injury with Quinn Ewers. What does this mean moving forward if Malik Murphy is the starting quarterback for the Texas Longhorns football team? Hook 'em. Peace.